The year was 1945 and the date was Christmas Eve. In the small Appalachian town known as Fayetteville, the Sodder family's home would come to burn down under unusual circumstances. But that wasn't all. As the family began to uncover what had transpired that night, they began to believe that 5 of their children had been taken before the fire even began. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty. These are the Sodder children, and this is their story. To get to the heart of this incident, let's start from the beginning. Wife, Jennie Cipriani, who also immigrated to the States from Italy during her childhood. Fayetteville would become their home, which was also the home to many Italian immigrants, and due to George's success, they were able to purchase a 2-story timber frame house around 2 miles to the north of town. In total, George and Jennie would have 10 children together, with the first being born in 1923. While in general, George and the family were respected and considered to be friendly, George did have strong opinions on certain subjects and didn't shy away from telling people what he thought. Of course, this always runs the risk of alienating people, and George held a staunch opposition to the leader of Italy at the time, Benito Mussolini. All things considered, in a place with a heavy Italian presence, and at that time, this may not have been the best place to express his opinion, and may have been a mistake that would come to cost George dearly. By the time 1943 had come about, the Sodder family had added their final member, and Joe, one of their children, was now out serving in the Second World War. When Mussolini's regime was brought down in 1944, George's criticisms seem to have left a permanent negative mark against his character that the community didn't forget. October of 1945 would be the first time that George faced animosity and received an ominous warning. A life insurance salesman knocked on George's door, which in hindsight may have been a warning in and of itself, but after declining his business, things got heated. And according to various sources, George was told that his house would go up in smoke and that his children would be destroyed. Some sources suggest that the salesman put it down to the remarks that George had made earlier about the Italian regime. Another potential, quite ominous warning came not too long afterwards when another man seeking work came to George's property and told him that the fuse boxes behind the property would cause a fire someday. George, on the other hand, told him that the entire house had been rewired and brought up to date when they had an electric stove installed. After this, George did get back in contact with the electric company, who reassured him that it was safe and were puzzled themselves. At the time, they put it down to a man simply seeking to work and creating problems out of nothing to earn some money. Other than those 2 incidents, the family had lived in the small, middle-class Appalachian town peacefully. However, this takes us to the Christmas Eve of 1945, where whatever happened to the Sodder family was nothing short of disturbing, and their lives would be changed forever. Christmas Eve was a time of excitement for the family, and the 5 siblings couldn't wait for the following day. For whatever reason, their older sister, Marion, had given them their presents early, and the 5 were desperate to play with them. They asked their mother if they could stay up late together and play for a while, which Jennie reluctantly agreed to, but made them promise that they would turn the lights off and lock the doors before they went to bed. With that, Jennie retired to bed, not knowing that this would be the last time that anyone would ever see the 5 siblings. That night, as Jennie was sleeping, she would be woken up to a number of strange occurrences. Firstly, she recalled being woke up by the phone ringing. She said that it was dark and cold and that they normally didn't receive calls at this hour, but she answered the phone anyway. She said that on the other end of the line was an unfamiliar woman and sounds of laughter, clinking glasses and talking in the background. This woman had asked to speak to someone that Jennie didn't know and was subsequently told that she had called the wrong number. Jennie noted that the woman laughed nervously and hung up the phone. Now that she was awake, she could see the light peering beneath the door and she had realised that all of the lights were still on. Jennie went downstairs to turn them off, but also realised that the curtains had been left wide open and that the door hadn't been locked. Jennie was annoyed and assumed that the kids had just forgotten to close the house down in their excitement and had fallen asleep. While annoyed, Jennie didn't want to wake them up and instead locked the house down herself and made her way back to bed. The time was around 1:30 AM now, and Jennie felt like she was about to drift off when again she experienced something out of the ordinary. She said that she heard a sudden, loud noise on the roof. She described it like a rock hitting the roof and then rolling down the side of the house. It's not clear how much time had passed after this, but it wasn't long, and Jennie became aware of the distinctive smell of smoke and darted out of the bedroom to see that a fire had broken out in the office room. In a mad panic, Jennie woke up George and the pair began shouting loudly for everyone to get out of the house. Presumably because of the building's timber frame, the flames were growing and spreading at an alarming rate, and the house was quickly filled with a thick smoke. Needless to say, timber frame buildings are incredibly dangerous when faced with fire because the structure itself burns, putting the whole foundation at risk. Once they made it to the safety of the outdoors, they realised that Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie and Betty were unaccounted for. Quickly, George tried to burst back into the property, but the intense heat and smoke flushed him back outside. He then made his way to the first floor window and badly injured his hand while trying to gain entry. But again, the sheer heat near the stairs pushed him back outside. Panicking now, George came up with a plan and rushed to the garage to retrieve his ladders, only they weren't there. Growing frustrated, he rushed to the two hauling trucks that he kept on the property with the intention of climbing up them and into a window. Only neither of them would start. Was this a coincidence? George reported that they were working fine prior to that night. One neighbour had already witnessed the fire from his property and called the fire brigade, but he couldn't get through. Meanwhile, Marion sprinted to another neighbour's house, but they too couldn't get through to the fire department. Helplessly, the family tried to use the water in the nearby water barrels, only to find that the water was frozen solid. Absolutely nothing was going in the family's favour, and they were forced to watch on completely powerless. One of the neighbours got in his truck and drove down to the fire department to report what was going on, but it was too late. The fire was so fierce that it had razed the house to the ground in under 45 minutes. Astonishingly, due to a whole range of factors, including the time of year and the internal phone systems of the fire department, they arrived at the now destroyed home at 9 AM, which of course was far too late, and all that was left was ash, rubble and smoking debris. The only thing that could be done at this point was to investigate the origin, which also proved to be highly unusual. At this point, let's go back in time and revisit some of the official reporting on the incident at the time of occurrence. On the 26th of December 1945, press reports were abound with headings such as "Flames Raise 7-Room Home Christmas Morning." On that day, the Beckley Rayleigh Register reported this: "Remains of 5 children sought in the ruins of home demolished by fire Christmas morning." The inquest to follow the Christmas morning, of which 5 of 10 children in the family of Mr. and Mrs. Sodder passed away, was pending today while firemen searched the ruins and ashes for the bodies of the younger sisters. The blaze was discovered about 1:30 AM yesterday when Mrs. Sodder was awakened by smoke. When she attempted to report the fire by telephone in the office used by the family transfer business, she discovered that the electric current was off. Fire Chief Maurice was notified of the blaze, but informed that the house was already burnt to the ground. The fire department did not go to the scene until 9 AM. According to F.E. Springer of the state police, the house had a basement, 5 downstairs rooms and 2 upstairs rooms where the family was sleeping. The fire apparently started in a downstairs corner of the house near the place where electric wiring and the meter box entered the house. A strong wind was blowing and the house was completely destroyed within a few minutes. John, who returned only a week ago after 3 years of service in the army, told this story of the fire. Mother and father went to bed about 10:30 p.m. We went to sleep upstairs about 11:15 or 11:30 p.m. We had everything ready for Christmas. There was a set of Christmas lights in the window of Mother's bedroom. George Jr. woke me up and I came down expecting to help put the fire out. When I got to the door, flames were already there and I couldn't get back. Fire had swept from the place where the desk was to the front door. George had started trying to wake the others, but I guess they either didn't wake or didn't move fast enough. I think somebody set the fire. Mrs. Sodder and the other survivors believe the fire was set and an investigation will be held. The mother said that she couldn't find the ladder to the upstairs loft when she noticed the fire and reported other circumstances which she considered suspicious. Officers discount her theory and believe faulty wiring was responsible. That was a very interesting article by the Beckley Raleigh Register, and it pointed out another unusual fact. Not only could the family not find the ladders from the garage, but the loft ladders inside the house could also not be located. Is that a mere coincidence, and perhaps Jennie was that panicked she overlooked it? Or is there something more sinister to this? A more thorough investigation into the fire was launched, and it was initially reported that the likely cause was faulty wiring in the Christmas lights. However, it was also noted that when the ruins of the house were searched, no human remains could be found among the rubble. One coroner was reportedly surprised at just how fast the house had gone up in flames, how quickly it had been engulfed and subsequently collapsed. Some members of the fire department were surprised that no evidence of the 5 siblings could be found. At this point, I did a little bit of digging to try to find out the likelihood of finding remains after a house fire. I came across a post by Dr. Ramsey Armory, a medical doctor at Harvard Mass General Surgical Oncology, who was tackling the question, "Is it true that bone doesn't melt?" I quote, "Bones do not exactly melt, it's more falling apart as they are very solid. The complexity of the molecules and the high melting points means if pushing it temperature-wise, it will disintegrate. Though this is not representative for the molecule itself, just keep in mind calcium melts at 860 degrees Celsius. Simply put, bone is made mostly out of inorganic materials, partly mineral. That is what makes it much less prone to disintegrate through fire at lower temperatures than organic materials such as fat and muscle tissue. That figure of around 860 degrees Celsius is probably close to being accurate, as most crematoriums operate at temperatures of around 900. Now, according to the official website of the Department of Homeland Security, fire is fast. In less than 30 seconds, a small flame can turn into a major fire. It only takes minutes for thick, black smoke to fill a house or for it to be engulfed in flames. Heat is more threatening than flames. Room temperatures in a fire can be 100 degrees at floor level to 600 degrees at eye level. Unfortunately, they do not state whether they are talking about Celsius or Fahrenheit, but given that they are representing the United States, I imagine they are talking in terms of Fahrenheit, which would be 38 and 315 degrees Celsius. Though it is important to clarify that they are talking about room temperatures and not the temperature that the fire is burning. A fire service instructor for the state of Iowa said typically, I would say a common house fire would run at around 1000 to 1400 degrees, but in some scenarios could run in excess of 2000 degrees. Again, given that he is speaking from the United States, I'm assuming he's talking in terms of Fahrenheit. That would be between 538 degrees Celsius and 760 degrees Celsius, and beyond 1100 in the worst case scenario. I can find no information specific to this fire in terms of suspected temperatures, but depending on the heat, that could be the reason as to why no bones were found. I suppose the question is, did the house burn at a higher temperature than 860 or 900 degrees Celsius? I will note here that Jennie did take matters into her own hands and went to a local crematorium to learn about this very topic. She was advised that it took at least 2 hours at their very high temperatures discussed earlier for a skeleton to disintegrate. The fire at the Sodder home lasted for around 45 minutes, so make of that what you will, but it seems to me that finding bones would be probable in that scenario. Though do keep in mind that I'm not an expert on the topic of house fires or anything like that. However, I did get in touch with a family member of mine who was in the fire service for over 25 years who can be considered an expert. He added, the times and temperatures above are correct, however after cremation, bits of bone remain and these are then ground down mechanically. Crematorium ovens are specially lined, so a very high temperature can be sustained over a specific period of time. I don't believe this fire would remain at such a high temperature for long enough for there not to be any evidence of bones. Temperatures of house fires depend on the construction of the property. This property was timber framed, so would have burned down relatively quickly. The figures quoted could well be correct in this instance, however, because of its construction, I suspect the fire would be vented very quickly and a sustained, very high temperature wouldn't happen. Because of double glazing in the homes of today, temperatures get extremely high very quickly. They can nearly burn themselves out because of a lack of air. However, if a door or window is opened, air is entrained and a backdraft occurs. Bearing in mind this was 1945 and the investigators wouldn't have the technology we have today, I still find it hard to believe that no evidence was recovered if they were in that loft. Some remains would have been recovered, I'm sure. This contact did later add some more food for thought. He questioned whether the age would be a factor in not leaving any evidence behind. The Children's Healthcare of Atlanta state that an adult's bones are harder, more brittle, and more likely to break than bend. A child's bones are more flexible because their chemical composition is different than that of adult bones. This means that a kid's bone might bend or bow instead of breaking. Bent bones can actually be harder to treat than broken bones. That is actually quite interesting, but I'm not sure what that would mean in terms of disintegration. Logically and at a glance, it might suggest that the bone of a young person might disintegrate easier than that of an adult's. However, again, I am no expert in this field and I'm not completely sure if it works that way. Also, another factor of concern could be the individual weight of the children and body fat percentage, as technically that would mean more flammable fuel, which would heat the body at a higher temperature. But based on the pictures that we have, I wouldn't imagine that that would have played a great role in this instance. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Sodder agreed with the assessment and felt that the lack of any remains was highly suspicious, but the police were putting it down to an accident. The couple firmly believed that their children were not in the house and had been taken. As time went by, George and Jennie began collecting pieces of information that reaffirmed their prior beliefs about what had happened. They first came across a bus driver who told them that he had seen fireballs being thrown onto their roof, which makes one wonder if this is what Jennie heard that night. Interestingly, an odd green rubber casing was found on the site, which was later theorized by some as potentially coming from some sort of incendiary device. Secondly, a telephone repairman who they had called in to check things over stated that it looked to him as if the power lines had been cut rather than burning up and causing the initial fire. Thirdly, one witness stated that he saw a man enter the garage of the house during the time of the fire who proceeded to steal things, and said that he thought that he was also responsible for the missing ladder. Additionally, other things began to surface too. Some of the other children recalled seeing a van on a number of occasions parked along the US Highway 21. They said that the driver had watched them coming home from school, and perhaps the most important indicator of all, and something that is easy to overlook, absolutely no one had seen or heard the children at the windows trying to get out. Does this just mean that none of the 5 woke up? Or, as George and Jennie believed, the 5 siblings were still out there somewhere? Over time, other eyewitness reports would come in. On the night in question, one woman stated that she believed that she had seen the 5 pass by her in a car while the fire was still raging. 50 miles west of Fayetteville lies a diner where one witness claims to have served breakfast to the 5 on Christmas morning, but couldn't recall how many adults were present. As word of mouth spread and as pictures were put up, more and more reports came in. One was from South Carolina, where a woman stated that she believed that she had seen 4 of the 5 in a hotel, though of course none of these eyewitness sightings were ever confirmed. But all of these occurrences injected the family with the hope that they may still be out there. Together, they went back to the police, explaining everything that had happened, but were told that the case would not be reopened, as the coroner didn't believe that a crime had occurred. George was consumed by this event and would repeatedly dig through the ruins of his former home looking for any clues that would place them there. Eventually, George did discover a few bones and something that was later found to be an organ. Upon testing, the organ was found to belong to a cow, and the bones were of a person much older than any of the missing. That was a very strange find and poses many questions of its own. Who, when, where, why, and how did that happen? But it is of interest to note that the bones and organ were not damaged by fire. Almost 3 years later, on the 14th of November 1948, the Charleston Gazette did another piece on this event and included some very interesting information. Firstly, George Swain, who was a member of the American Detective Agency, stated this: "It is one of the most baffling and mysterious stories of the age. Since the fire and events have led the parents to doubt the passing of their children, I have toiled and worked on every conceivable clue that could convince me of one of 2 facts. Are they still with us, or did they pass in that fire?" A private investigator by the name of Oscar Tinsley stated this: "I am firmly convinced there is not enough evidence to indicate that the children passed away in the fire. I am therefore led to believe they were either still alive or that they were otherwise disposed of. I have lain awake at night and thought about just what came of those children." The article continues, "It is upon this very lack of evidence that the Sodders hinge their faith, because it is an established fact that in the hottest and most prolonged fires, which take the lives of human beings, there usually remains in the debris positive traces of its victims. However, the all-day search of the former chief, F.J. Maurice, and his men of the Fayette Fire Department was futile. They found nothing that they could identify as a segment of a human body." Maurice added, "It was the most completely burned up place that I have ever seen in the course of my 16 years with the department. I have hunted down and talked with honest people who were the first on the scene and asked them this pointed question: did you smell or hear anything to indicate that they had still been inside during the fire? All those who were there during the entire time of destruction stated that they did not. The very fact that they didn't smell anything gives strong credence to the belief that they did not perish inside the house that day." George and Jennie wholeheartedly stood by their theory that the children were not in the house and instead believed that the 5 children had been taken. They stated that there was ample time for someone to climb up into the attic windows either by ladder or the tree next to the porch. George points to the fact that his own ladder had gone missing and stated that he is of the opinion that either an individual or a group of individuals used those ladders to take them. George said that it isn't sympathy that the family are looking for, but rather they just want the truth. He said that they do not believe the circumstances of the fire's origin had been properly investigated and conclusions were reached far too quickly given all of the other circumstantial information that arose. It's not clear how much time had passed after this incident, but George had seen the picture of a girl in New York whom he said looked exactly like one of his daughters, so he made the trip there to investigate. Unfortunately, I've got to be careful with the way I phrase things now, but Detective Swain gave some insight as to why George did this. He said, "The general public are not aware that there is a market for this type of thing. In larger cities, they are sold for as much as $1,000 or more. To put that number into context, in 1945, $1,000 is worth around $14,500 today." Detective Swain continued his reasoning and said that there are those out there who turn to these kinds of markets in order to avoid the complications or red tapes of the adoption agencies. Thus, he entertained that they had been taken for this purpose. He said that it is possible that someone met the children on Christmas Eve, told them a story of a big Christmas party at which they would have received many gifts, and persuaded them to climb out of the window on a ladder. Alternatively, a threat may also have worked, but it could have caused the five to run and alert their parents. Detective Swain did struggle though to explain how they might have been kept away from their home for such a long time. He said perhaps they were shown a picture of the ruins that once was their home and told them that all had perished with it. It's important to note at this stage, during the events of that night, the Sodder family was not thinking of this potential outcome. They believed that everyone present was inside the house. It was only months later, after the various pieces of circumstantial information came to light, that they began to seriously consider that it was not as it seemed at first glance. However, and as said, this was in opposition to the authorities, whose verdict came back that the five siblings must still have been in the house and had passed away due to the smoke and flames. The authorities concluded with the faulty wiring theory, and that is where their judgment remained. The family were trying to gather evidence of arson, but Carl B. Vickers, the prosecuting attorney of Fayette County, stated that there was nothing to suggest that arson was afoot. According to the Charleston Gazette, at that time, no one could find enough evidence to proceed with an arson case. But the Sodders believe that the sum total of suspicious circumstances is enough to convince the average person of arson. They refer specifically to the incident of a young man allegedly stealing 2 chain blocks out of the Sodder garage while the fire was burning. He was later convicted for stealing the blocks, but no felony charge was filed against him. They also remember that a number of witnesses came from a nearby drinking establishment in a taxi. None of the witnesses questioned could recall who the driver was, nor what kind of taxi he was operating. Neither the driver nor the cab has been found. They recall the incident of a sound on the roof a short while before the fire and wonder whether it was made by some sort of incendiary object. They bring to mind the fact that the ladder was not immediately available. They found it later about 75 or 80 feet over an embankment near the house. They wonder at the mystery of the telephone call just preceding the fire, whether it was some kind of malicious mockery made by one who knew of the family's forthcoming plight. There were a couple of interesting points there. The individual that was charged for stealing from the garage, did he also move the ladders? At first, it was thought that the ladders had been stolen, but it turns out that they had only been moved from the garage. I can find no hard evidence that pins it on the man, but that seems very suspicious. As for the noise on the roof, that is also certainly suspicious too, and I can see precisely what the Sodders meant when they state that there seems to have been a lot of coincidences here. Now at this point, let's quote the article again. A later investigation would show that the telephone wires were cut just before or during the fire. Although the parents received no threats that anyone would burn their house or take their children, the suspicious circumstances before and after, they believe, suggest that they were taken and that arson had occurred. Focus your mind back to the start of this video, where Wikipedia, alongside many other online outlets, suggested that a life insurance seller threatened, in a sense, to burn their house down. Is that a part of this story that has been embellished over the years? Because earlier news reporting and the Charleston Gazette, who were in direct contact with George and Jennie, make no mention of that happening, and in fact just directly stated that they were never threatened or anything like that. It just goes to show how careful you've got to be when reading about things online. Now let's have a look at more oddities. About 3 days after the fire, 3 men and women came to the door of the Sodder home and asked to see their babies, as if to learn if the parents suspected anything. At another time, a girl told one of the Sodders that she had heard that 4 of the 5 children were taken from the window. Another girl claimed that she had seen, as she passed in an automobile while the fire was burning, one of the children who perished looking out of a window. Later, she refused to testify to this effect. Unfortunately, the article doesn't relate if the Sodders knew the 3 men and women who came to the door who asked to see their babies. That would be incredibly unusual if they didn't know these people. On the other hand, if they did know one another, this could have been a friendly request that was engulfed by paranoia, but I have no idea, and it would be interesting if there was more information available on that. Secondly, the girl that stated that she had heard that they were taken out of the window, where did she hear this from and who? Were there now rumours abound in the small town? And was this caused by George and Jennie's own suspicions, or was there something more to it? None of this is clear, unfortunately, but the Sodders explored every available avenue of investigation to them, even managing to contact the FBI. But the director, J. Edgar Hoover, told them, "Although I would like to be of service, the matter related appears to be of local character and does not come within the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau." George and Jennie employed 3 lawyers who, despite the best efforts of all involved, just could not come up with enough evidence to bring it forth to the courts. Interestingly, the prosecuting attorney, Vickers, consulted with the judge on the suspicions of arson, and State Trooper F.E. Springer was questioned. Springer relayed that the police report was based on the fact that the electric switch box was located near the origin of the fire. However, the family hit back and insisted that the power was still on inside the home when Mrs. Sodder was awoken to the fire. Perhaps all involved had their reasons, but it really does seem as though absolutely no one wanted this case on their plate and didn't want to spend the resources and time to investigate it. And the Sodders were having no luck in trying to convince the authorities that this was not a simple accident. Springer was questioned as to why no evidence at all was left behind, and he answered that the 2 chimneys of the house may have retained a lot of heat, aiding with the decomposition, even after the flames had dispersed. It's not clear who made the accusation, but George was accused of having large quantities of oil and gas stored inside the basement, but George vehemently denied this allegation. The fire marshal said that judging by the appearance of the ruins, the fire must have been tremendous, and that he believed it had the potential to completely disintegrate the bodies. Chief Maurice agreed and said that he didn't understand the Sodders' way of thinking, but admitted that he couldn't prove that they were inside. By this time, the ruins had been covered over with a layer of dirt, and was kind of a cemetery, as the Sodder family had done this before their view of the event completely changed. They wanted it to be dug back up to search for further evidence, but other officials involved didn't favour further investigation. The acting coroner did say that there was something peculiar about the decision, and that those empanelled didn't seem to realise the importance and significance of having more evidence to help with their verdict. When Private Detective Tinsley got involved with the case and the organ was discovered, it was identified by a hospital worker and butcher who both stated that it was a cow liver. This surprised the Sodder family, who stated that they had no idea how or why that would have been there. They said that they didn't have any beef liver in the house at the time. This was simply bizarre to them, but they did welcome the find, as they felt it gave new strength to the idea that the 5 siblings were still out there somewhere. Tinsley and the family arranged to take the liver to the Criminal Identification Bureau and arranged this with everyone 3 days in advance. However, when he came to collect it from the mortuary, he learned that it had disappeared. The proprietor of the mortuary also said that he didn't know where it had gone, but stated that it didn't belong to a human. In conclusion, there are only 2 possibilities here. Firstly, the 5 children were inside the house at the time of the fire and passed away during the incident, or they'd been taken before the fire took place by some sort of highly elaborate and coordinated scheme. I have no idea how to explain the missing liver organ or why that would have been taken, and by who and for what reason. Something that does seem fairly obvious to me is that this was not investigated thoroughly enough. The circumstances were strange, and while evidence cannot be deemed by way of coincidence, there did seem to be an awful lot of that going on. Just the garage alone being robbed whilst the fire was raging is absolutely bizarre. Why would someone choose to do that at a moment when you're most likely going to have a lot of eyes on you? Ultimately, I have no idea which side to support. I can understand the sentiment behind Chief Maurice when he said that he didn't understand the Sodders' way of thinking. In a sense, he was implying that the Sodders had got extremely invested in the idea and were desperate for it to be true so that they could cling onto the hope. However, and with that being said, I can also appreciate George and Jennie's position. They experienced lots of unusual circumstances and coincidences. What do you think happened? Did George and Jennie end up paranoia filled? Or were their assumptions correct? Do share your thoughts on this one. Thank you for watching. If you found the video interesting, then please do leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. If not, then feel free to leave a dislike, I'm just looking for your honest opinion, so do share. And do share your thoughts on the video, I'm looking forward to hearing it. I'd also just like to say a special thank you to my patrons who keep this channel moving forwards, so thank you very much for your support. I hope that you've had a great day, or evening depending on where you are. Be safe guys, and I'll see you next time. Peace.